Good afternoon. My name is Claude Yancey. I'm a former president of the American Heart Association. I'm in Chicago at Northwestern University as a cardiologist. I was mentored, raised, nurtured, and coached by an amazing Black woman, my mother. And of the many lessons that she shared with me, one that was a little unusual but was part of her deep conviction was that I was supposed to eschew any use, any reference to the word proud or any version thereof in my language, because if I could feel pride, I could also feel other emotions that were not forthright and not withstanding. But this afternoon, I'm accepting her and saying, I am proud to be a Black physician. I started my own journey in medicine 41 years ago as a freshman student at Tulane. My path was a little bit different than the ones that you've heard described, but the journey nevertheless faced obstacles, barriers, challenges, and nonetheless, we're here today. And we're here today really representing an incredible message that I'm pleased to say is being championed by the American Heart Association. The Heart Association has a recent mantra. What is your why? As you've listened to this, what is your why? Why are you engaged? As I listen to this, I remember of my many different whys. One of them is this: the only luxury that any of us have, it's not money, it's not possessions, it's our health. And the way in which we can enable that particular luxury in the African American community, in the underrepresented minority community, in the communities of color, is to have those physicians, those leaders, those participants in the healthcare enterprise that understand the cultural experiences that reflect upon their own experiences, that can communicate with the community and let them know what kinds of issues are important and what will be done about those issues. And so this is, yes, about diversity in medicine, because I want to change the face of medicine. But it's more than that. It's about the diversity of thought, and it's about enabling health as a prerequisite to a joyous life, which we need to have more of in the African American community. I am pleased now to introduce an extraordinary human, someone who has done wonderful things to really promulgate positive messages, to understand dilemmas, to synthesize those dilemmas, and then resurface with new ideas and fresh themes. Tremaine Lee is a feature reporter with MSNBC. You may have seen his work in the past. He has a personal story to share about heart disease, but he also will serve as a moderator of a panel, a brilliant panel of experts in the domain that you just listened to in this movie, that will help us understand more about what's happening now and what we need to do going forward. I'm really, really pleased to introduce to you a remarkable human being, Tremaine Lee.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yancey. I'm incredibly excited to be here today, but I'm probably more excited to introduce what is truly an amazing panel, esteemed panel of experts in the field, all of which you've seen in this film. So let's introduce our panel. Dr. Herman Taylor, who is the Director of Cardiovascular Research at Morehouse School of Medicine and a Principal Investigator of the famed Jackson Heart Study. Next is Dr. Gregory Primus, who is the founder of Chicago Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedic Surgery and a former Chicago Bear. Go Eagles. Dr. Ashley Denmark, who is the founder of Project Diversify Medicine. Dr. Leslie Douglas Churchwell from Yale School of Medicine and a longtime American Heart Association volunteer. Last but not least, Pamela Garmin Johnson, who is the Vice President of Health Equity for the American Heart Association and this film's executive sponsor. Also, we have two other folks I want to introduce, the creators of Empowered Voices, More Than Enough to Heal, producer and director Crystal King, and director and lead cinematographer Philippe Carvalho. Welcome, everyone. And before we jump in, I'd also like to recognize several leaders and association volunteers who made this project possible and are here today. If you'll stand as I call your name, American Heart Association CEO, Nancy Brown. Dr. Yolandra Johnson. Debbie Jarvis from Howard University. Dr. Karen Johnson. Tanya Primus. And Dr. Bonnie Wilson. This first question, and forgive us if the angle seems a little funny. I can go on the other side. Yeah. This might make things a little bit easier. Good to see you finally made it. Thank you very much.
I was here for the film.
Dr. Taylor, it was important for you to make sure the voice of Morehouse was represented in this film. Could you speak about this idea of carrying on that proud legacy of being associated with Morehouse University, especially in passing the flame to the next generation of Black physicians?
Thank you very much. That's a great opening question because, Morehouse, not only for African Americans, but I think nationally, is synonymous with quality, with a special education, with producing a special, in the case of the college, a special Morehouse man. But the Morehouse School of Medicine is majority female. It's important to note and to remember that Morehouse School of Medicine trains, and I want Dr. Benjamin to hear this in particular, trains as many women or more women than Black men. But in that tradition of excellence that sets the Morehouse graduate apart from, I think, any other graduate. And I don't mean to suggest that any school represented here is any less than, but certainly at Morehouse, we really stress this. And alongside that excellence, we stress the notion that we are here to lead and advance the cause of health equity. It's our mission statement, and it's in our DNA. And with each class, we feel like now the class size is about 100 students. We feel that we release into the world a group of 100 individuals who really do have the capacity to change the world.
And that impact clearly is undeniable. But you mentioned in the film, we've heard a lot about the Jackson Heart Study. Could you speak a little bit about how that changed the landscape in terms of medicine?
For those who might not know, the Jackson Heart Study is a study of cardiovascular health and disease in the Black community that is unprecedented and larger for a study of its type than any equal study. Some of you may be familiar with the Framingham Heart Study. The Framingham Heart Study was started back in 1948, and it looked predominantly at white people in Framingham, Massachusetts. There may have been 4 or 5 Black people in this group of 5,200. The idea there was that they were going to follow these folks forward in their lives. Some would get heart disease, some would not. And the Framingham Heart Study would devise a way to determine what predicted heart disease. So everything you know about high blood pressure, cholesterol, sedentary lifestyle, weight, etc., That's all product of that Framingham heart study. The problem, though, as we approach the 21st century was that while whites in America had dramatic improvement in their heart disease rates, African Americans, while getting better, were lagging further and further and further behind. So the Jackson Heart Study was intended, like Framingham, to study a group of individuals to see what put blacks at excess risk. It's still going on. It started in 2000. The results are still coming out bit by bit by bit. But I think the key things to remember are a lot of the risks that were established in Framingham have been reaffirmed for us, only perhaps with greater intensity. High blood pressure, by the time a black man reaches age 60, 80% of them have high blood pressure. Almost everybody's a patient by that time. Jackson showed that. Jackson has shown also, on the positive side, that there are a lot of black people who work hard and get their blood pressure under control. Far too many don't, but still there's reason to hope. The other thing, and I'll wrap up about Jackson Heart, it was more, and it is more than just a study, because we are deeply embedded and involved with HBCUs. Tougaloo College is the home of our Jackson Heart Studies Scholars Program, which has produced cardiologists, family practitioners, even lawyers interested in health out of a specialized program, and that they go on to and I think impact health disparities in a multitude of ways. So it's a study, it's scientific, it's making impact in that way, but it's also expanding that pipeline for healthcare providers.
I think that your comments touch on a bunch of points that were critical in the film. It's the impact and importance of Black physicians, but also the care that Black patients receive, and really diving into the community to understand what affects the community. So with that, I want to jump to our directors. Crystal, why was this necessary? Why now? And why a sense of urgency? Because you get the sense that by the stats that stream across the screen, that this is important because you see the disparity in the numbers. Why now? Why this story?
For several different reasons. Number one, stories are important. Yes, and we know that. And I think today being the day after we found out that we lost Toni Morrison, I would like to just acknowledge that, right? She was an amazing storyteller. And we know that stories are the way that we move people forward. So in this story, we wanted to go at it from several different angles, because there were so many amazing call to actions within those angles. Number one, we have to protect our HBCUs. I proudly wear my Albany State University shirt. I am a proud product of an HBCU. We know from listening to Dr. Valerie Montgomery Rice just how important HBCUs are in strengthening that pipeline. So number one, that was important. Number two, we really wanted to look at how implicit bias, and as Dr. Primus so wonderfully stated to us, it's a little bit more than that implicit bias that is really impacting what we face in terms of healthcare disparities. And those disparities become even worse if we don't strengthen that pipeline of African-American physicians. So that was important to us. And then furthermore, speaking directly to that next generation of physicians who oftentimes really want it, right? We see it, it's like a carrot dangling in front of our faces, but there's so many other things. And we also had this conversation that are distracting students. And so they don't feel like they can do it, or they focus more on the barriers than they do focusing on what they're able to achieve through medicine. And so it was critically important for us to focus on those points as we told this story.
Philippe, there were moments in this film that were just striking. And for me, it was going through, from those old black and white photos into more contemporary photos. And so I want to ask you, in terms of the cinematography, what was the visual language that you were aiming for? And what were you trying to say with that language?
So something that's driven me always is to kind of echo what Crystal said, is stories, right? Telling people's stories. And I think the greatest privilege we can have is to telling another person's story. So first I wanted to tell the lineage that there's a long legacy that African-American physicians are part of. But secondly, these are macro systemic issues that sometimes are faceless. But I wanted to add, specifically through portraits and stuff like that, is maybe it will trigger a memory or remind us of someone we know that we put a ceiling on them. maybe we need to reevaluate how we view them or our biases towards them. So I wanted some of the imagery to give specific faces to the diversity and the variety of people who are specifically being affected. And hopefully that will help us kind of nudge them back onto the path. And that was kind of my emphasis with some of the cinematography B-roll that went over, the very poignant messages that were given by the characters we profiled.
And this is the last question to the two of you. You talk about narrative and story, and there's a story arc here, right? Like a journey through time, a journey through personal experience. But I want to ask you, in making this film, what was the journey for the two of you like? I'm sure these are like babies and you're watching it grow.
I mean, for my part, obviously, I'm an editor first and foremost, so being knee deep in some of these conversations, it really sheds light on your blind spots and some of the things that you are not aware of, just you're ignorant of. But also specifically, I know I'm a first generation American. My wife is a physician as well. She came here from Brazil at 14. We're both Brazilian. And you see the missteps that are kind of given to us as we're growing up from guidance or lack of guidance. And for me, that's why I think I carved in a section about mentorship, because I feel like that's kind of a lost art over time and something we can really take from medicine. I mean, medicine still has that mentor, the student and the professor. And I think we've lost that. And if we can apply that, well, we not only create better physicians, but better people. And that's something I took away from it as one key point that I took out of just my journey through this film. And as I pivoted through, the journey, because it's a very live project, and we only gave you a snapshot in 30 minutes. So that's something I took away from it.
For me, it was emotional. It was very, very emotional. And I think I've said this probably to a number of you, cried on the phone with Ashley, just hearing her tears after she had an opportunity to see the film. Having an opportunity to spend the day with Dr. Herman Taylor was magical for me. Dr. Churchwell, even though she was not featured in the film, we had some amazing conversations. So one word sums it up for me, and it was really emotional. I was very proud of the people that I was having the opportunity to interview, from a Dr. Valerie Montgomery Rice to Dr. Wayne Frederick to Dr. Jackson, who oversees the Montague Cobb Laboratory, and understanding that it was probably the single greatest line for me in the film was when she said, we're not only studying 400 years of our history and our past, but 400 years of our future. And when she talked about how trauma gets embedded in the epigenome, for me, it brought me to tears. And it really helped tell the story of how so many people in communities around this country are facing trauma. And people think, oh, it's just generation after generation of people creating this chaos, but it's so much deeper than that. So for me, it was emotional. That's what it was.
Thank you. That was such an important moment in the film. And another was, Dr. Primus, when you spoke about the difference between explicit bias and implicit bias. We seem to dance around that a lot, and implicit bias gets a lot of people off the hook. It seems softer, but the systemic nature that fed all of these inequities that we see in healthcare and otherwise speaks to something a little more nefarious, right? I wonder how pervasive do you think in the medical field is that explicit bias, and what's the real impact?
The impact is real. It's very significant. We experience it every day. I get patients that come to my clinic as a second opinion. And just to bring you into the Black physician's office and experience, I'll go over the treatment course or paradigm of a particular illness. And at the end of that discussion, the patient's crying. And as an orthopedic surgeon, I'm often dealing with obesity as a major issue, breaking down joints. And we're dealing with that sensitive subject of weight loss. So I'm thinking, did I offend this woman? Did I say something about she needs to lose weight? Did I not handle that right? But she's crying, she's shedding tears. And I asked, why? Did I say something that upset you? And she says, no, do you mean I don't need surgery? And I said, well, we didn't even get to surgery. I'm just offering you all these opportunities. And she goes on to explain to me that the previous physician experiences she's had, she was just treated as an object, as a surgical case. And the doctor would come in and just say, oh, you have bad knees, you need surgery. And if I showed any type of hesitation, the doctor would get upset and literally just go up, leave the room and say, well, come back when you're ready for surgery. So those are real experiences that our Black patients receive. And unfortunately, for me, that's not implicit bias. That's not unconscious biases. That's racism. You know, that's an example of the legacy that this country was birthed out of. And so these are real issues that I think we need to address head on. I'm tired of this conversation about implicit bias. I'm tired of going to conference after conference where we talk about this, but don't address real explicit racism. And we can go from slavery all the way up into the current time and give very detailed examples of why we have healthcare disparities today. We do not have healthcare disparities today because of biases, okay? In fact, I'm tired of the debate or the dialogue of why we have healthcare disparities. And I would offer this counter narrative to you today. Consider this notion. We have healthcare disparities because we're supposed to have healthcare disparities. These healthcare disparities today were meant to exist.
Well, let me just ask one follow-up question. Given how few Black doctors there are in this country, you'd have to imagine that a lot of Black patients have that experience of feeling overlooked or feeling like an object. But how does that make you feel as a Black doctor? And this question should go to all of the doctors, but how does it make you feel knowing that people you're treating from your community, that could be your aunts, your uncles, your cousins, your brothers, have had that kind of experience, sometimes in some of the most difficult times in their lives?
Well, I look at it from both sides. I look at it from the tragedy, but I also, being a history buff, understand that we've come such a long way. I mean, we have suffered as a race. You think about the exploitation. Most scientific advances came on the backs of Blacks, whether through slavery or even post-slavery. A lot of experimentation took place. And so we've evolved out of that to, we still have these disparities, but we're making strides. And so I have to look from the optimistic lens of, you know, getting more and more physicians in the examining room to take care of. And as an example, is Dr. Mason in the audience? Did she make it? Can you stand up, Dr. Mason? This is Dr. Bonnie Simpson Mason. So she represents, in many ways, the solution. So at the end of the day, in order to really affect change, we need more Black and brown physicians taking care of Black and brown patients. And she has a program that is beyond successful. It's a pipeline. She has over 90% match rate into a very competitive specialty. It's the envy of other programs. In fact, for white organizations, it's almost too successful, if you understand what I'm saying. And so, very positive, and I would like for, hopefully, to expound more on this, but at the end of the day, we need to develop and support pipelines that's going to change the educational system all the way from pre-K up through elementary, middle school, high school, so that we can create this channel of students that are interested in the health field, so we can ultimately get more of us taking care of us.
Dr. Denmark and Dr. Churchwell, I'd love to hear your point of view on being on that kind of front line. And I'd imagine so much of this is about trust, given all of the horrible experiences that Black folks have had with the medical profession and field for generations. How much of it now is about trust and you breaking that wall of distrust?
It is so much about trust. When we were living in Nashville with the Heart Association, we tried to do a stroke intervention by going through the church facility. And when all of us doctors came to these preachers and told them what we wanted to do, they were very negative. And we were like, why are they negative? I mean, we are definitely trying to help them. But then they began to relate stories of how not only they or their family members or their parishioners were treated negatively by physicians. For me as being a physician, it's always important that to treat all of my patients as if they were a family member. And that's what I tell my medical students. Your job is to treat every patient you encounter as if they were a family member. That way, you are giving them the best care ever. And it's just amazing just how much racism exists just within the medical profession. I know when I was in medical school, I was doing a surgical rotation, and I was one of the few people, the only African American who got to do this particular surgery. And then the attending, he asked me, "So are you interested in surgery?" And I said, "Well, no, I'm not, but I'm just here to learn." And he was like, "Well, why did you ask me that question?" He said, "Well, if you were interested in surgery, then I would teach you how to sew." I said, "Well, if you taught me how to sew, then maybe I would be interested in surgery." And then he said, "Well, just the fact that you are just a woman, so it doesn't really matter." And this was in the 1980s when I went to medical school. So I do want to encourage people who are here, who have children, who are interested in medicine. It is a wonderful field. And there are people who tell you just all along the way that you can do it. There are people who tell you that you can't do it. But if it's in your heart, you have to do it with all of your might. I love what I do. I love seeing patients. I love teaching the medical students. And it really is a legacy. My father was a physician. My grandfather was a physician. And it's just part of the legacy just of our family.
Piggybacking off the idea of a new generation of Black physicians coming into the field, Dr. Denmark, your platform aims to diversify the medical field. But as it stands right now in 2019, when you're dealing with younger folks in particular, what are some of the barriers that exist between getting young people not only interested in medicine, but also really getting them into the field?
Well, I think just coming from that angle where you saw where I grew up, Ferguson, Missouri, a lot of us are kind of trying to fight through the barriers of just oppression and racism that kind of holds us back, or lack of finances or guidance on even how to even start the process. So one common thing we always see is that people just don't understand how to even enter the field or how to go about this journey. A lot of us kind of get on that path, maybe starting out in college as maybe a pre-med something, but on that journey, someone starts saying, "Well, you're not good enough to be here." "Oh, hey, you should go be this other profession because your grades don't match where you need to be." And some of us hear those things and internalize it, and we already see there's not a lot of us here. So we already are under the assumption we don't belong here. And so the minute one thing happens, we quit. And so what my whole mission is to try to stop them from quitting. We have to start telling them that you can do this. Now, the journey's not pretty, it's not Instagram worthy, but if you hold on, you can get to the promised land. And so that's my whole point here. And I feel like I created Project Diversify Medicine out of necessity for my own sanity. I went from, like I said, predominantly Black community, and I went to Spelman College with my sister right here. Yes. Spelman, yes, 07. And I continued to elevate in the field. And in my journey, I did lots of different angles of going to a master's program or doing a post-backwards, or like alternatives for going to medical school, where you strengthen your application and then apply. A lot of people don't know about that. We kind of say, "Well, I don't know, I don't have the grades, so let me quit." And my whole stance is like, you know what, there's many ways to get into med school. If you go straight from college, great. If you go to post-bac, wonderful. If you go get your master's, awesome. But there's many ways to do it. But I also talk about my story of my hustle. I worked at Macy's, I worked at CVS, I dug ditches, I did whatever I had to do to kind of get where I am. So like I said, it's not Instagram worthy, but like I said, you will get that white coat. And like I said, that's why we need to have more people understanding what it takes to become a doctor. And as I got to my journey, I went to med school 9 months pregnant. And when I came in, I didn't tell anyone I was pregnant. That was the gag. So I came in, it was a big secret, and I said, ta-da, I'm pregnant, and I'm gonna keep going with my degree. And people start taking bets on me. Like, this Black girl, one, I was 1 of 5 there out of 150 people. And 2, they was like, she's not gonna make it. But I came back stronger than ever. I kept going. I passed every board. I graduated on time. I didn't let anything stop me. And that's the whole point. I want people to keep, thank you. But I want people, and my story is unique, so I'm coming to med school pregnant, but there's gonna be some sort of hardship that's gonna be stopping them. And that hardship, you can't let that stop you. And so I want people to get comfortable with the idea of being uncomfortable, get okay with taking different paths into medicine. And so that's what really Project Diversify is all about. It's about kind of just being bold with your dreams of becoming a doctor, not being afraid to say it. I think I came up in the age of MySpace. If I didn't have that visual image of someone being a doctor or seeing a Black doctor, my first Black doctor I saw, I was 22 years old. So that tells you there's just not enough of us here. And so that's the whole purpose. You come into my community and you see there's Black people everywhere in white coats doing the same thing you want to do. Here I am, I mentor on the weekends. I tell them, this is how you do your application. This is how you do your personal statement. We need more of us coming back and doing these things and laying the ground, like everyone on the stage here, to pave a way. Because there's no way we can actually bridge that gap without us helping and giving back.
And also, and I would like to add something. So my grandfather, who went to medical school, he actually was a principal. He had been applying to medical school year after year after year and was a principal in the school system and finally got accepted. So, even though you may have a different path to get there, you still need to keep working and don't let anything stand in your way.
Could I just echo, first of all, applaud both of you, applaud your grandfather as well, and just take a moment to give a shout out to Black resilience. Oh, yeah. I think the disparities are real, and I couldn't say it any better than you have, that racism has played a part in the genesis of these disparities. It's been so crushing and at times horrible that it really should have threatened the very survival of our people. Yet and still, it's 2019, we're here. I mean, look who's on stage talking about being physicians, encouraging others to be physicians. I think that is one of the secrets of our resiliency. That is this impulse to pull together, to link arms, if it's marching down the street, or whether it's encouraging the next generation of pre-meds to come on through and not get discouraged at every little bump in the road. And I think we need to acknowledge, applaud, and talk about the fact that, the anthem of the civil rights movement was, "We shall overcome." To talk about the things we have overcome and acknowledge the potential and power of that going forward.
Excellent. I have one last question before we open it up to our guests here. And it's a pretty straightforward one that tumbles into another question, actually. Do Black patients actually receive better treatment from Black physicians? And ultimately, if the trend continues and fewer African Americans are going into the medical field, what's really at stake? And let's open it up. We can start with Dr. Primus.
I believe I have to rely on some of the academicians in the room in terms of what the literature states, but my experience is more anecdotal. Based on what I've said, I believe there's such a humanistic part of treating patients that we're losing. And so you have to care about that individual. It has to be more than a job. And so I would say, and I believe that if you do represent that community and you come from a caring heart, and as Black and brown people, our story, our history just molds that in us. I think we're just more caring and sensitive in general, not only to provide better health care to fellow Black and brown patients, but to all people. I think we do an excellent job. And just to give an example, well, I won't go further with this because it's going to take too much time, but to the students and to the folks in the audience that have young people, I would say being in healthcare is such a privilege and an honor. There's not many things more meaningful and profound than our health, our body. And there's such a deficit in this field. When you talk about, well, what can I do in life? What can be my purpose as a young person? Encourage people around you to consider medicine, because it's such a need and such an honor and privilege that I think it could be a win-win scenario for our people.
I can say this about the quality of care, and there's lots and lots of things written about it. The tendency for African Americans to confront patients who are the most challenging, the most difficult, the most suspicious, to go into Black communities, go into impoverished communities. It's a statistical fact that we are much more likely to wind up taking care of those people, that we have a heart for that we have a sensitivity that seems to follow us in measures that perhaps are not as generous among other ethnic groups. So the statistics show that we march right into Liberty City, we march right into Ferguson, and we take care of those people. I think that it is important for us also in these discussions to remember that our presence in medical school, our presence in group practices, lifts the level of sensitivity of those institutions in those situations. You know, it's harder to be that racist or implicitly biased individual in the practice if you're working every day, having lunch every day with somebody who has a level of sensitivity that they carry with them in everything they do. So I think our mere presence is an important aspect of getting young people to come into medical school and stay and graduate and go out into the world. There's a lot more that can be said about this issue, but it is so very important for there to be a Black and brown presence in medical schools and practices across the country.
And I definitely piggyback that, because I really do see that when I go into spaces that are predominantly white or not minority, and maybe I come behind, they're willing to see, well, she did it, so maybe she can do, someone else can do it too. And so that's why it's so important that we get more people in these spaces. And yes, you may be one-on-one for a while, but someone else is going to be able to come behind you after you. So you're opening doors. So this is bigger than you. It's not just about you getting your white coat. It's about opening doors for someone else to come behind you and get their white coat too. Because it's so important, because like I said, even my own father, when he was ailing with heart failure, he was very ill and he was in the hospital. My parents are humble people. Like I said, we grew up in Ferguson, Missouri, very humble spirits, and they had no idea his daughter was a doctor. And they came out, told my dad at 2:00 in the morning, well, you're sick, you need to become a DNR. Mind you, no one's at his bedside, no one's there to kind of walk him through what this looks like, anything. And my father, who was stoic, was shaken to tears. And this is something that I see happen time and time and time again. Difference in treatment sometimes is happening. Whether it's implicit or explicit, it's happening. And it's affecting our healthcare. It's affecting how our outcomes are. Why is our family are dying younger than anyone else's family? So that's why it's so important for us to have us here, so that we can help people of our own community be able to walk this journey and have healthier outcomes that we're having now.
So studies have shown not only do African Americans care better for their African American patients, but also all patients, but also women tend to have better health outcomes when we take care of patients also. It is just so important to have a good rapport with your doctor. And so many of my patients who are African American just feel that way. But it's also important for me, as just in my practice in Nashville, I actually was the first African American out of 40 doctors who joined the practice. But then while I was there for 20 years, we ended up getting 5 more. And we actually got one who graduated from Meharry. Actually, two of them went to African-American medical schools. And I was so happy to have them to join us in the practice. And it's so important to bring people further up, and I'm behind you. And it's so important to teach the medical students that, every person has value, be it a janitor or a millionaire. They all need to get the same care, no matter where they are in terms of life. And they all need, and then we also need to offer respect to them and treat them graciously, the same way as I said that we should treat our family members.
And one more thing, I'll piggyback off what you just said because of what you broke the ceiling down in Nashville. I just read that. So there are still places where there are still need to be a first Black inserter physician, right? In 2013, Dr. Ebony Hilton became the first anesthesiologist at MUSC. I recently became the first Black family medicine doctor at my hospital, and it's been open since 1868. There's so many spaces where we need to go. So there's so much work to keep going. So we're up to making moves, so you make a move too, okay?
As we transition to the Q&A, I'd be remiss if we didn't speak to the work of the American Heart Association that is pushing into marginalized communities to raise awareness. As a journalist, I hear often that we're being a voice for the voiceless, but there aren't voiceless people. There are people who've had their voices stolen, and then we can amplify those voices. So I want to ask Pamela Johnson, why was this story important for the American Heart Association to help to amplify?
This panel is the reason why. They're telling their stories, the journey. We are each responsible for elevating the why. And we can't ignore, right, what the experiences that you've had. We can't negate what you have experienced and what others have experienced. And when we talk about diversifying the pipeline, for me, the reason why this was so important is we keep asking, and then you hear people coming up with proposed solutions, but they never asked you. And so being able to depict how we can, or looking at those programs and initiatives that already exist in the marketplace, then how do we elevate that? And the American Heart Association is just one institution. We have to be able to partner with others in order to elevate those particular strategies that are working. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Each one of you have shared how we could go about accomplishing this. And we do have to have those hard conversations. We have to have very direct conversations, conversations that may make other people feel uncomfortable, but they make us feel uncomfortable. And so we have to find a way to be able to find that medium, to be able to say, this is how we can make an impact. And there's not just one way. And we have to be able to be okay with that too. There has to be a multitude of different ways to be able to address this pipeline issue. I am not a physician, but what I am is a listener. And in listening to being at Charles Drew and hearing about, this gap, and then actually talking to Dr. Leslie Churchwell, this time last year, and her talking about her grandfather. And I was like, there is a story. And I actually went to Crystal and I was like, Crystal, this is a story that has to be told. And how can we tell that? And we sat down with Philippe as well. And, I know it was somewhat of a stretch at first, but once they started doing the research and started having the conversations, you saw the story unfold today. And I think that that is what what my responsibility is as being in the role that I have at the Heart Association, is being able to listen and to bring these strategies together so that we can look at how we can best amplify those so that we can truly make an impact.
Thank you very much. Now, with the 5 minutes or so that we have left, we'd love to open up the conversation to any questions from the audience. Can we get somebody with a microphone to go out there?
Hello, my name is Chelsea Mina, and I am a rising junior at Howard University. Yes, thank you. And I believe this is definitely an important conversation But I also want to point out that one of the barriers that HBCUs have compared to PWIs is that people do not give back. And when people do not give back, a lot of our students are not able to finish undergraduate to actually become doctors in other professions. Because I'm also a student ambassador at Howard, and one of the biggest majors we have is biology, because people want to become doctors, but they're not able to because they do not have the financial assistance from Howard University and from other places to actually help them reach their goals. So this is not a question. I'm just saying to everyone that has gone to an HBCU to please give back to your universities, even if it's $20 a month. It's important to give back to help the next generation bring all of us forward. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Victoria Heath. I have a granddaughter who now I realize that she wanted to be a medical doctor, but she went to college and they did do the things that you said, not giving her the support and classes and stuff like that. And she's graduated, but she still wants to stay in the medical field. How can I support her? How can she find help or mentorship to get her through and continue on?
Well, I would say that she can still become a doctor, definitely. Like I said, I took a non-traditional approach into med school. Like I said, I worked for everywhere from CVS to Macy's. So it's really just about her having that determination and belief and finding a path for herself. I do Project Diversify Medicine. I do weekly mentorship every week, sometimes twice in a week. And it's just like talk about different paths into medicine. And I try to help them with the applications or post-bac, whatever. We talk about a whole bunch of stuff over there. So directed to my IG page, but also as a family member, so supporting her every way you can. Like I said, if it's just a simple ride to a program she needs to go to, that is helping her. If it's simple encouragement, which is so huge, that is helping her. So simple things that may seem simple are really huge. So keep being a supportive person for her. And like I say, you can shoot into my IG. I do a lot of mentoring over there too. So
I would also offer that Black physicians often come through a non-traditional route. I also didn't go straight from undergrad to medical school. I actually played 3 years in the NFL, believe it or not. So from the athletic, student athlete part to medicine. But the issue is we don't have that advantage of legacy, the legacy advantage. Most of us are first generation physicians, so we're kind of navigating and finding our way. But as I mentioned, there are programs, there are resources like Nth Dimensions. And if anybody's here, go on your phone and type it in, Nth Dimensions. That's Dr. Bonnie Mason's program. And again, as you mentioned, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's the most incredible resource for advice, mentorship, and developing this pipeline.
She also may want to consider to work toward a master's either in public health or else in, just one of the sciences and do well that way and then apply to medical school. And she should definitely look for mentors. We are all here and we can definitely offer advice to her.
Yeah, I would echo what was said by the other speakers. And I guess perhaps specifically point to not just Morehouse School of Medicine, which has post-bac programs and master's degree programs that are specifically designed, some of them specifically designed to help people enter medical school or in some cases other research areas. I think probably at every single historically Black school, similar programs exist, but I'm very proud of the ones we have at Morehouse School of Medicine. She should check those out. And the point about being encouraging constantly, that conversation on the porch with my grandmother was really pivotal for me staying the course and keeping the faith.
We have time for one or two more questions if we can keep it really tight.
Hi, thank you all for being here. I like the story with your grandmother. I have a granddaughter who's entering into her junior year of high school, and she has already claimed her career path as an orthopedic surgeon. So I just wanted to know, is there any words or associations that I can steer her toward to become a part of now and not wait until she get into college or even med school, that she can have the hookup of, mentorship and just like-minded people.
Absolutely. So please, let's talk after this. I'm an orthopedic surgeon. Dr. Bonnie Simpson Mason, I've said her name like 3 times already. She's an orthopedic surgeon and has the program for your daughter. This is beautiful. This is exactly the purpose of this connection.
Last question.
Hi, my name is Edwina Corprew, and I want to take a slightly different angle, if you don't mind. I'm in IT. I've been in IT for 30-something years. I've been a unicorn. You don't see Black women running IT organizations, okay? So even though it's not medicine, it's very similar. And so I do a lot of mentoring trying to get young Black women to think it's cool to do STEM or to be innovators. And so the thing that I heard you talk a little bit about, and they touch upon a little bit, is you have to create the pipeline way before college. That interest has to come, kindergarten all the way up. And it's not cool in the Black community to be smart in STEM. It just isn't, at least in my limited experience across this world. I work from IBM all the way to startups. So how do we create the pipeline when it really can be sustained and grown? The most pivotal thing I heard out of that movie was, and I almost cried, was the numbers are declining from HBCUs, right? We're going in the wrong direction. So I'm interested in hearing your perspective about that. Thank you.
So that is a good question. So I want to say, like I said, I grew up in Ferguson, Missouri, and we weren't exposed to a whole lot. And my daughter, we live in St. Louis now, and she's one of the best schools in Missouri. And at kindergarten, they're already exposing them to STEM and have them build robots as a kindergarten. So I think what we have to take the ceilings off our children and start exposing them as much as possible. Even just taking down the science center and exposing them, or let them go to a coding camp if you can find one. But just give them all the opportunity and taking the limits off of what they can do. There's no limit to what a child can understand. I even authored a book called Olivia's Doctor of Ventures, and I talk about different types of doctors, from orthopedic surgeon to anesthesiology to cardiology. And it doesn't matter that it's children who are reading it, they will understand it. I have a 4-year-old coming to me saying, I want to be a pulmonologist now after reading your book. So I think we as a Black community have to start taking off the limits of our children and stop saying, well, it's too early to expose them. Early exposure is key. So it doesn't matter what form it comes in, just start exposing them to any and everything that's positive in regards to STEM, and that'll kind of help them bridge the gap.
And I think one of the things, and we can get, additional information on this about the numbers declining. I think what Dr. Montgomery Rice was pointing to within that was that the numbers were declining in terms of the number of Black physicians that were being produced because of the declining numbers entering those Black medical schools. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because we definitely want to make sure that was edited and came across the right way. But I'm really glad you brought that up. And I remember hearing that statistic as well. And it almost brought me to tears too. So I could definitely relate to what you were saying. That is an important point.
And can I just add or close with the issue of education? So educating Black kids in this country has been a national emergency, crisis. A siren should be going off every day. It's an embarrassment. The average Black kid graduating with the 8th grade reading level, there's no question why we're behind. There's no mystery to this. But when you think back on the history from slavery, there weren't many slave codes as explicit as the codes you can read up on the code in Alabama in 1833, where they explicitly stated the punishment for being caught teaching a slave how to read and write. So you're seeing the evolution from that, and most of us experience a first-generation college education, or a second-generation high school graduate. So education is still relatively new when you think about it in terms of of the Black community. So we're fighting this battle in terms of high expectations, education, the real value of education. And as a community, we have to get over this notion that, yes, it's not cool to be smart. That's been a part of the brainwashing and that legacy of slavery and exploitation that we're still suffering from today. But we have to fight that it's our responsibility as Black people to fight that and change the way we think about education. Because even to this day, in 2019, it's not cool in many of these schools to speak grammatically correct English, and I'm even ashamed to say English, but the language that we speak in this country, or no math, science, and be considered smart. So that's a problem that we as a community have to address.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be a good steward of time.
Okay.
But one last comment. I don't want to get fired or abused at any point, so I want to make sure we get out of here on time. There's another movie waiting.
This is real brief and very specific. I would just ask folks who are interested in a specific model that addresses that very problem, that to go on the Morehouse School of Medicine website and look for any reference to the TAG Academy, the Tuskegee Airmen's Academy, a school that Morehouse School of Medicine has adopted, and we have impacted the curriculum. Physicians are there regularly. We do all sorts of things ranging from 3D printing to exposure to virtual reality experiences in medicine, and the kids love it. They're drinking it up from grade 1 through 6.
Thank you very much. This has certainly been an amazing panel, entertaining, educational, informative. So we could just give our panelists one more round of applause. Thank you all, and thank you to the American Heart Association. That was good. That was my favorite part, man.